I am 38 years old, and for 35 of those years I thought my father did not love me. I thought he was just a quiet, angry man who lived in our house. But I was wrong, and I need you to hear this story, because maybe you have someone like him in your life. Someone who does not know how to speak, but knows exactly how to carry you. And I do not want you to wait 35 years to finally see it. Let me tell you about my childhood. My family did not have much money. There was no extra money. No family holidays to the beach. No new bicycles. No dinners at nice restaurants. We only bought the things we absolutely needed. My father was the one who kept us going. But if you ask me what I remember most about him, it is not his face. It is his silence. He was the quietest person I have ever known. He woke up before the sun. He came home long after it was dark. He smelled of dust and heavy lifting. At dinner, he sat at the head of the small wooden table. He looked at his plate. He ate quickly. He never asked about my day. He never played games with me on the floor. He was always just too tired from making sure we had enough to eat. But it was not just the silence that kept us apart. It was the fear. When I made a mistake, his quietness turned into a storm. I remember dropping a glass of milk when I was 10 years old. It shattered all over the kitchen floor. Most fathers might say, "It's okay, let's clean it up." My father just stood there. He looked at the milk. He looked at me, and he said, "Why can't you be careful? We work hard for this." He didn't yell, but his deep voice crushed me. I picked up the broken glass and I cried. And I learned a lesson very quickly. Be careful. Be quiet. Do not make a mess. Do not be a burden. So, I hid myself. I hid my sadness. I hid my bad grades. I hid my dreams. I just tried to be a good, invisible boy. My best friend growing up was a boy named Jason. His family lived 2 streets away from us. They were not rich either, but his house felt like a completely different planet. I remember the first time I went to Jason's house for dinner. His father was sitting on the floor, building a model airplane with Jason's little brother. When Jason walked in, his father looked up and said, "Hey, champ, how was your day?" And Jason told him everything. The test he almost failed, the girl he had a crush on, the fight he had with a kid at school. His father listened to all of it. He laughed. He gave advice. He put his arm around Jason's shoulder, and I just stood there, watching. Something in my chest felt heavy. It was not jealousy, not exactly. It was more like hunger, like I had been missing something my whole life, and I was only now finding out what it was. At my house, if I told my father about a crush, he would have stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. If I told him about a fight, he would have said, "Don't cause trouble." If I told him I almost failed a test, he would have said, "Work harder." That was it. Jason's father hugged his children every single day. When Jason scored a goal in football, his father ran onto the field and lifted him up. When Jason was sad, his father sat beside him on the bed and just stayed there. I saw all of this. I watched it for years. And every time I went home afterwards, our house felt even quieter. I used to lie in bed at night and wonder, what is wrong with my father? Why can't he be like that? Does he even care about me at all? My father had a simple formula for life. Work hard, get married, have children. That was his entire philosophy. He did not understand passion. He did not understand finding yourself. If you were sad, work harder. If you were worried, work harder. Work was his answer to everything. When I finally grew up and moved out, I felt free. I was finally away from the heavy silence, but without even realizing it, I followed his formula. I worked hard. I got married. We had 2 children. But my relationship with my father never changed. When I called home, it was always the same. He would take the phone from my mother, clear his throat, and ask 2 questions. Are you healthy? And do you have enough money? I would say yes. He would say, okay, here is your mother. That was our entire relationship. Then I turned 35, and my life fell apart. The company I worked for closed down. I lost my job. I could not find a new one. My savings disappeared. Suddenly, I was the father who could not feed his own family. I started skipping meals so my children could have enough to eat. I would lie and tell my wife I already ate while I was out looking for work, but even then, we still could not pay our rent. I lay awake every night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was drowning. I was failing. I was terrified to tell my father. I could already hear his voice in my head. You didn't work hard enough. You are lazy. I waited until I had absolutely nothing left, and then I called. My mother answered. I swallowed my pride and told her everything. The next day, I checked my bank account. There was money, a large amount of money, enough to pay our rent, enough to feed my family for a long time, enough to sleep at night. That evening, my phone rang. It was my father. In 35 years, he had never called me himself, not even once. I held my breath. I waited for the disappointment. I waited for the anger. Did you get the money? He asked. His voice was quiet. Yes, Dad, I did, but... Don't worry about it, he interrupted. Just eat properly. Take your time to find a good job. We have your back. And he hung up. No anger, no lecture, no work harder. I sat on my bed and I cried for a long time, because in that 5-second phone call, 35 years of fear just vanished. That night, I realized something so simple it almost made me angry at myself. I realized my father is a kind man. He just never learned how to use his voice. I realized his love was never in words. It was in the heavy boxes he carried for 30 years so we could eat. It was in every morning he got up before the sun when nobody was watching. It was in that quiet bank transfer when my world was falling apart. He did not know how to say, I am here for you. So he just showed up. Every single day. That was his version of love. Jason's father could say, I love you out loud. My father could not, but my father could work 14 hours in the heat and come home and hand every penny to my mother without saying a word. I spent my whole childhood thinking Jason's father was the better one, but now I am not so sure anymore. A few months later, I found a new job. Slowly, our lives got back on track. I eventually saved up enough to pay him back, but when I tried to give him the money, he refused to take it. He just pushed the envelope back to me and said quietly, put it in the bank. You have a family to take care of. That was it. The fear was finally gone, but the silence remained. It is hard to break a 35-year habit. 2 years went by like this, then something happened that changed everything. My mother called me one afternoon. Her voice was shaking. She told me my father had collapsed at work. They took him to the hospital. It was his blood pressure and severe exhaustion. They said his body was finally breaking down from all those years of heavy lifting. I drove 3 hours to the hospital. I ran through the white hallways. And when I found his room and pushed open the door, I saw something I was not ready for. My father was lying in a narrow hospital bed. He looked small. That is the word that hit me. Small. This man who was built like a mountain, who spent his whole life doing heavy lifting, who filled every room with his silence, was lying there, looking small and thin and pale. His big, rough hands were resting weakly on the white blanket. His eyes were closed. I sat in a plastic chair beside his bed. I watched him breathe, and a heavy truth hit me. I have never hugged this man, not once, in 37 years. And he is getting old, so much faster than I ever realized. And we are running out of time. But even with that heavy truth, I couldn't do it. The wall between us was still too thick. I just sat there in silence. When he finally went home a few days later, he was different. The doctor said it was a serious warning. They told him he had to stop working so hard, and you could see the change taking over him. He started walking much slower, spending most of his time just sitting quietly in his chair. Even his big shoulders looked heavy and tired. But I could not forget that hospital room. I kept seeing him lying there, small and pale, every time I closed my eyes. And I kept thinking the same thing, over and over. I have never hugged this man. His body is breaking down, and I have never once put my arms around him. What am I waiting for? His 68th birthday came 3 months later. There was no big fancy party, no loud crowds, just our family having a simple dinner at the same small wooden table, the same silence. When it was time for me to leave, he did something unusual. He walked me to the front door. Normally, he would just go straight to his armchair. I stood in the hallway with my coat on. My hands were sweating. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown man. But standing there, I felt like a terrified little boy again. It would have been so easy to just say goodbye, turn the doorknob, and leave things the way they were. But I couldn't. He stood by the door, looking at me. His face wasn't angry anymore. It just looked old and very tired. "Drive safe," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. I didn't turn around to open the door. Words were useless anyway. I stepped forward, reached out one arm, and pulled him in for a clumsy, sideways hug. Just a simple, awkward embrace between two men who didn't know how to do this. Instantly, his entire body went as stiff as a board. He froze. His arms stayed pinned to his sides. It was the longest 3 seconds of my life. I felt like I was hugging a statue. My brain screamed, "This is a mistake! Let go!" But I didn't let go. I just gripped his shoulder and closed my eyes. "Happy birthday, Dad," I whispered. "Thank you for everything. I love you." And then, very, very slowly, the tension left his shoulders. He relaxed, and one of his big, rough, tired hands slowly came up. He patted my back, just twice. 2 slow, careful taps, that was all. "Okay," he muttered quietly. "Okay." It wasn't some grand movie scene. He just stood there in the quiet hallway, calm and steady. No grand gestures, no long speeches, just 2 clumsy pats on the back and 1 single word. But to me, those 2 taps were enough. More than enough. They were everything I had been waiting for my whole life. If I had just walked out that front door that night, if I had let my fear win, I would be carrying that empty regret for the rest of my life. I would be an old man myself someday, still wondering what it felt like to have my father pat my back just once. I got lucky. But I still think about those 35 years of my life, and they hurt. 35 years of being this man's son and feeling nothing but fear. I thought his silence meant he did not care. I thought his strictness meant he was angry at me. I was wrong about all of it. The love was always there. I just never had the courage to turn around and see it. Jason told me something once that finally makes sense now. He said, "You know, growing up, you always wished your dad was more like mine. But I used to look at your dad, a man who worked 14 hours a day to build a safe life for you. And I wished I had a rock like that. There is no such thing as a perfect father. They just have different ways of loving us. And my father gave me everything he had. He just gave it quietly. My dad is getting older now. He still doesn't say, 'I love you.' He still sits in his armchair and watches the evening news. We still don't talk much, but the silence between us is different now. It is not a wall anymore, because I finally understand what it means. His silence was never coldness. It was just the quiet exhaustion of a man who spent his entire life keeping his family safe. He did all his talking with his two hands, so we wouldn't have to struggle. I wasted 35 years acting like a terrified little boy, but I am not afraid of him anymore. Now, when I visit, and he walks me to the front door and quietly says, 'Drive safe,' I know exactly what he means. I don't need him to be Jason's dad or anyone else. I just need him to be mine. If you like this story, please subscribe and share.